Hello everyone, here's an H200A card that I've got running in my PowerEdge Dell server, R710 II. And what I've got here is an H200A card, which won't work in the internal dedicated PCI-E slot, but it does have obviously the Dell firmware on it. I want to change that to being an LSI firmware running in IT mode, and also will work in the dedicated PCIe slot. So to do that, it's really easy to do, so what I've done is I've made some scripts here that do what I want it to do. So let's begin. So first thing to do is you need to do a list. As you can see my SAS address here. Which you need to make sure you've written down, because this will get wiped in the process of flashing, so you need to put it back at the end. So make a note of your SAS address. So I've done that stage. So as I've now listed it and written down my SAS address, I can now kill my card. So with this command that I've made, and what this does is it erases the entire flash of the H200A, including the SAS address. So if we wait for that to finish, so this is now erasing the card of the H200A. And what I'm going to do is first of all put the firmware of the H200I on it, which is integrated and will work in the dedicated slot. So by putting that firmware on there, it will change the SBR block to being one that will work in the dedicated PCIe slot. So we're going to do that in a moment. Okay, so now I've done that. If I do list, my list command, what will happen now is I will get this option, because there's no firmware or anything on the card whatsoever. It's going to ask for a firmware. So what we now do is we type H200. So we type H200I dot firmware. And then this will write the H200I firmware instead of the H200A firmware to the card, as it is now being completely wiped. Obviously you can see the commands that are run by the bat file in this screenshots. We don't need the BASes because we're going to wipe it and change it to LSI firmware. So all we need it to do is to put the H200I on, which will give us the boot, the SBR block that we need, and also it'll allow us to upgrade. Right, so now we've got it as an H200i firmware card, but the only thing it hasn't got is it hasn't got the BIOSes. We can actually add that if we wanted to make it an H200i card, but I don't want those BIOSes because I'm going to make it run IT mode. So what I'm going to now do, after we've done the H200I thing, is we want to do flash flash 1, which will now run this. Now what flash 1 is doing is it's using the older firmware to run an earlier to install an earlier version of the IT firmware, which is version 7, using the flash the SAS to flash 09 to do it instead of the latest. And by doing that, it doesn't have the same checks that the newer version of the SAS to flash has. So this will allow us to cross flash. So as you see here, it's now giving us a prompt which is saying that it's found that the vendor is different to the vendor on the card, which is Dell. So it now wants to add the wants us to put the LSI firmware on the card instead of the Dell firmware. So we're going to say yes to that. So what we can do now is, if I actually do a list command, you'll actually be able to see that it's got no SAS address yet because we've wiped it. But you can see now that the NV data is different because it's not both the same, because one of those is now the LSI firmware and the other one is the Dell. But it does now change it, so we've got LSI as the vendor, but the board is still a PERC H200I, so it thinks so it will work in the dedicated PCI-E slot when we're finished. So now we've done that first one, we can now run flash 2, and flash 2 will give us the latest firmware images on here and the latest standard BIOS, and that's what that's going to put back on. And this one's using the latest version of SAS to flash to do that, and the latest firmwares, which you can see reflected in the file names. So wait for that to do that. So now we're just writing the BIOS image as well. It's doing it in the same command. Right, so now I've got the standard BIOS on here, and I've got the latest LSI firmware on here, both LSI obviously, and it's got the SBR of the H200I. So I could leave it like that because my PERC R710 is working under the BIOS. It's not running in UEFI mode. But if you do want to add the UEFI BIOS as well, which you might as well, if you type flash 3, we're now going to put the UEFI BIOS on here as well, and that's also the LSI latest. This one's also the signed one. So again, you can see the commands I've used on the screen. Right, so now we've got that done. All that is required now is to fix the address. So I've already done this, but actually what I'll do is I'll show you. If you go edit, that's what I'm doing. You can see that I've already put the address in here. So it's all ready to go. So you do Alt F and do S, and then Alt F and X. But I've already done that, so I can go X. So I'm already done. So all I'm going to do is run fix address, and this is putting back my fake address. Obviously use the one that you've written down on your card, but this is for the purpose of this video. I'm using a fake address. I can correct it later. Right, so that's now done that. So now if we go list, you'll see what we have on the finished result. So as you can see, the SAS address is now corrected. Okay, so now what we have is we've got the SAS firmware, which is the LSI firmware, which is running in IT mode, as you can see by the firmware product ID. It's got the SAS address corrected. We've got it with the latest firmware on there of 20.00.07.00. We've got the latest BIOS on there, which is LSI, which is 07.39.02.00, and then we've got the UEFI BIOS on there, which is 07.27.01.01. And you can see that both IDs say that it's a SAS 9 to 11 8i. But because we've used the H200I firmware earlier, that will have fixed the boot block of the SBR. So now you can put this card into the dedicated PCI-E slot of your PERC H200A, and it will work. And thanks for watching. Hope that helps you.